Daniel Coleman never imagined his life would spiral down to a lonely graveyard shift guarding a forgotten warehouse on the outskirts of a city that never really cared whether he lived or died. But as he tightened his worn security jacket around his broad shoulders and checked his reflection in the cracked window of the foreman's dusty office, he knew there was no turning back. The radio at his belt sputtered with static and the occasional dispatch from the main gate, but mostly silence swallowed every hour after midnight, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the faint hum of flickering fluorescent lights that seemed to burn out more often than they stayed lit. Each night he paced the perimeter like a ghost, haunting his own regrets, boots crunching over gravel and broken glass, peering between the stacks of rusting containers that smelled faintly of oil, old wood, and a damp rot that no amount of cleaning ever seemed to banish. Tonight's, though, felt different from the start. The air heavier, the shadows thicker, and the sense that someone, or something, moved just out of sight whenever he turned his back, though when he swung his flashlight around, the beam only caught dust motes swirling lazily and the glint of stray nails poking from weathered pallets. At exactly 11:59 p.m., as if timed to some cruel joke, his radio crackled to life with a broken whisper that sounded like his name drawn out through a throat full of water. Day on, come inside. And he froze, his heart drumming so violently against his ribs he could swear it would echo through the rafters. Yet he forced a dry laugh, blaming a prank or faulty wiring. But deep down his gut twisted because he hadn't told a soul he'd be alone tonight. The regular second guard had called in sick, leaving Daniel as sole keeper of this cavernous tomb of forgotten cargo. Stepping through the main loading bay door, its hinges screaming protest into the cold air, he flicked his flashlight in slow arcs, catching glimpses of old forklifts draped in cobwebs and rows upon rows of crates stamped with faded shipping marks no one could read anymore. Every echo seemed to mock him, bouncing back a heartbeat too late, and his boots scuffed along the oil-streaked floor as he followed the distant sound of metal dragging, or was it chains rattling, deeper into the belly of the warehouse where the security cameras always glitched to black. With each step, the temperature dropped until his breath fogged before him, swirling like phantom smoke, and the stench of mildew gave way to something far worse, the coppery tang of blood that triggered memories of the incident that ruined his badge and sent him into this exile. He told himself to turn back, to radio the main gate, but his legs refused to obey as a faint light pulsed from behind a stack of massive wooden crates marked "Do Not Open." The same crates he'd logged a dozen times as unmoved on his nightly reports. Curiosity, or perhaps a death wish, dragged him closer, his breath hitching as a low hum, like a generator buried deep underground, vibrated through the soles of his boots and up into his bones. When he rounded the crates, the sight before him sucked the air from his lungs. A lone security monitor, powered on despite no outlet nearby, flickered grainy footage of this very hallway. Only in the footage a figure stood exactly where he stood, but its face was an obsidian void, its mouth yawning impossibly wide as if screaming, though the speaker remained silent. Daniel staggered back, the flashlight slipping from his sweaty grip and clattering to the floor, its beams spinning wild circles across rusted catwalks overhead where he glimpsed shapes, dozens, maybe more, creeping along the railings, silent as the grave. A cold hand, impossibly strong, clamped down on his shoulder and he spun, fist raised, only to find empty air and the distant echo of a laugh that sounded far too much like his own voice. Panic clawed at his chest as the monitor crackled louder, the figure now pointing a finger at the crates beside him. And against all sane instinct, Daniel pried at the warped planks until they splintered away, revealing a hidden passage descending into blackness that stank of earth and wet stone, an impossible tunnel beneath a warehouse built on a concrete slab. A voice whispered from the darkness, a promise or a threat he could not tell. "It's your turn to watch, Daniel, come down." And he knew if he turned and ran now, the thing inside would follow him out into the world. So instead he stepped forward, down, swallowed by the earth, each footfall echoing as if he were walking into his own grave. Behind him the monitor fizzled out, its last flicker capturing an image that would loop endlessly until dawn. Daniel Coleman, flashlight dangling from his limp hand, eyes rolled back, mouth open in a silent scream that no one would ever hear. Above the hum of the warehouse's secrets asterisk, the descent into the hidden passage felt like a fever dream stitched from every nightmare Daniel Coleman had tried to drown in whiskey and denial since losing his badge and his sanity in that final, botched arrest 3 years ago. Yet each step downward hummed with a cold certainty that this place had been waiting for him long before he'd ever signed the warehouse contract. And as the concrete walls narrowed, slick with moisture that dripped from above like a heartbeat, he heard echoes that didn't match his footfalls, faster, heavier, too close behind him. Yet whenever he twisted around, the tunnel yawned empty save for the flicker of his dying flashlight. He tried the radio, pressing the cracked button, until his thumb ached, but all it offered was a hiss that resolved into whispers, closer, closer, and a burst of static that made him wince as it resolved into his father's voice. A man dead since Daniel was 12, scolding him for leaving the cellar door open again, for letting things crawl up from where they belonged. The passage widened into a subterranean chamber lined with metal shelves, sagging under moldy files and film reels labeled with dates reaching back a century. And overhead, a single bulb swung gently, casting dizzy shadows on the stone walls that bore deep scratches, symbols he'd once seen etched into evidence from a cult case he swore he'd closed for good. Among the shelves, mannequins stood in crooked rows, their plastic skin flayed in places to reveal rusted clockwork guts that ticked in time with the drips echoing from the ceiling. And he realized with a sick shudder that each wore a faded security badge, the names long since illegible except for the last one at the far end. Still wet as if freshly printed, Coleman. Deep nausea coiled in his gut, but his feet betrayed him, dragging him deeper to a steel door that pulsed with a low growl. The metal warm like flesh beneath his trembling fingertips, and from behind it came the sounds of old radios playing police dispatches from his past life, distorted with children's laughter and the high-pitched whine of feedback that drilled into his skull until tears blurred his vision. The door swung inward on its own, revealing a cavernous space brimming with freight crates arranged like pews around a pit glowing faintly green. And circling the rim were figures in security uniforms just like his, their faces blotted out with burlap sacks stitched tight over their heads, swaying in unison as they hummed the same broken tune that had haunted his dreams since he first fell asleep on duty 2 weeks ago. At the center of the pit, something vast and wet shifted, skin shimmering with oil-slick patterns, dozens of eyes flickering open and shut, each blinking in sync with his heartbeat so that he felt it stutter and race when they locked onto him. A voice filled the pit, impossibly deep yet sounding exactly like his own muttered confessions on lonely nights. Every lie he told his wife before she left, every secret bribe he pocketed, every plea for death whispered into a bottle. And the voice welcomed him home, promised an end to guilt, if only he stepped closer. Daniel fell to his knees, the concrete biting into his flesh as the chanting circle of sack-headed guards parted for him, hands brushing his shoulders, guiding him to the edge where he peered down into the pulsing mass that seemed to breathe sorrow into the damp air. Something coiled up from the pit, slick and black, wrapping around his wrist with a tenderness that belied its monstrous form, and as it drew him forward he thought, absurdly, of his father's old cellar, the broken latch that never kept the dark at bay. His final thought, before the thing swallowed him whole, was not of redemption but of relief, the comforting oblivion of never having to stand watch again. Above the pit, the mannequin's clockwork guts clicked faster, faster, until the shelves toppled in a domino roar that buried the chamber in a cloud of bone dust and rancid paper. Back in the main warehouse above, the monitor on the folding security desk flickered to life one last time, showing Daniel's vacant face drifting in endless black eyes, wide lips mouthing words no microphone could catch. And outside, the wind rattled the rusted doors as if impatient for a new guard to replace the last soul foolish enough to punch in after dark. But the warehouse did not sleep just because Daniel Coleman's mind dissolved into that seething darkness. In the days that followed, the facility's management filed routine paperwork to cover the empty post. Guard quit without notice, badge lost, uniform never returned. The new hire, a thin, wide-eyed kid named Marcus Lewis who needed quick cash for a hospital bill his sister couldn't pay, arrived for his first night shift unaware of the missing man he replaced, and the supervisor, a faceless voice on the other end of an ancient rotary phone, simply instructed him to check the cameras every hour and never, under any circumstance, open any crates marked with the stamped black insignia that bled through, even fresh paint. Marcus, whistling to fight off the creeping dread that thickened as dusk bled into an inky abyss outside, discovered the same faulty floodlight Daniel once cursed, the same flicker of shadows that danced beyond the reach of the bulbs, strung like Christmas lights along the outer fence. Each flicker drew his gaze. Each crackle of static in the corner monitors made him swallow back questions his paycheck couldn't afford him to ask. Meanwhile, below his feet, the hidden tunnel throbbed with new life, for what had once devoured. Daniel now hummed with the taste of memory and guilt, needing more, always more, to hush the thousands of voices trapped within its gullet. A low chorus that echoed up through the pipes and vents so that Marcus thought he heard laughter, bubbling from the toilet drain at 3 in the morning, when a lone delivery truck rattled up to dog for long after the gates were locked. Marcus radioed for clearance but only received a gurgling hiss in reply. The dispatcher's voice submerged beneath liquid static that formed words if he listened. Too long. Open the door, open the door, open the door, open the door. So he obeyed, metal latch scraping back, the dock door rolling upward to reveal nothing but empty asphalt and the faint outline of wet tire tracks that vanished halfway across the lot. The door jammed halfway down when he tried to close it again, shrieking against warped runners that no maintenance request ever resolved. By sunrise, Marcus was asleep at the desk, a crimson drip staining his collar where a thin scratch had appeared, just behind his left ear, and no matter how much he wiped it away, a fresh trickle would ooze, tracing delicate symbols onto his shirt that matched the old cult runes hidden on the basement walls Daniel once glimpsed. Night after night, Marcus fought his reflection in the dark monitor glass, seeing shadows that hovered just behind his chair, reaching with bloated fingerless hands that caressed his shoulders before sinking back into the black static. When The facility's rare daytime staff asked about the mold smell that clung to him or the ragged breathing heard through the vent system. Marcus only laughed too loudly, insisting he had it under control, that the place just needed better wiring, better locks, better everything. But secretly he knew that the warehouse had never needed locks to keep things out, only to keep them in. One shift bled into the next, hours swallowing days until Marcus could not remember how long he'd been awake, scribbling names he didn't know in the margins of the sign-in sheet. Names that later matched missing persons bulletins from cities 3 counties away. The final storm came without warning, thunder cracking open the sky, rain hammering the corrugated roof until water poured in sheets through the loading dock's warped seams, flooding the floor with filthy runoff that stank like an open grave. Marcus, too far gone to notice the rising water soaking his boots, stumbled from monitor to monitor, whispering apologies to Daniel, to himself, to the thing waiting in the pit, begging forgiveness for opening crates he shouldn't have opened, for feeding the darkness every secret he had left. The cameras all blinked out at once, plunging him into silence so thick he heard his own heartbeat pounding behind his eyes, until the hush broke with a single knock at the main entrance, one polite rap, a pause, then another, patient as a funeral drum. When he cracked the door to peer out, lightning split the world in half and framed a figure that should have rotted years ago. A man in a security jacket so torn it barely clung to his slumped shoulders, eyes glassy, lips parting, to release a shuddering sigh that sounded like rusted chains grinding on bone. Marcus fell backward, mouth open in a scream no one outside would hear over the howling wind. And the thing that once was Daniel Coleman stepped over the threshold, trailing a ribbon of black ooze that sizzled and hissed wherever it touched the waterlogged concrete. Overhead, the lights popped and died one by one, plunging the warehouse into a final midnight that no dawn would ever break again. When the first shift manager arrived days later, called by frantic, unanswered deliveries, and mounting complaints from clients who never received their stored goods, he found the main door ajar, the office empty, the monitors flickering endless loops of grainy footage, row after row of crates rocking gently as if something inside still struggled to break free, and in the final frame, burned into the corner of every screen, a lone guard's silhouette pacing endlessly down the main aisle, pausing every so often to press a bloody hand against the glass, mouth moving in silent plea for any soul foolish enough to take the graveyard shift next. No official report ever named what really happened at Evershine Storage, but locals say that on windless nights when the city's power grid flickers for no reason at all, a faint voice crackles through static on police bands, repeating the same broken dispatch bass, "Come in, base, come inside." And they say if you listen too closely you'll hear your own name whispered back, promising you a job you'll never leave, in a warehouse that never forgets. Jayden Miller thought an overnight job at QuickMart would be the easiest money he'd ever make, $20 an hour to man the register, restock the chips aisle, and keep the lights on until dawn while the city outside slept off its sins. But on the very first night, as he turned the key in the rattling glass door and flipped the neon open sign to a pulsing red glare, he felt something slip beneath his skin, a shiver that didn't fade even when he cranked the heater up and drowned the humming silence with pop songs that bounced tinny from a dusty radio. The boss, an older man named Ravi with dark circles carved under his eyes like bruises from 1,000 sleepless nights, had pressed the store key into Jayden's palm with a look that was more funeral than welcome, mumbling words Jayden barely heard over the roar of traffic, something about never turning off the freezer light, never checking the cameras after 3 a.m., and never, under any circumstance, unlocking the storeroom in the back unless he heard 3 knocks in a row. Then he'd shuffled off, leaving Jayden alone with aisles of stale candy, discount soda, and a register that printed receipts with a ghostly squeal that scraped the back of his teeth raw. For the first hour it was almost peaceful, a bored college kid behind bulletproof glass watching bored ghosts on the sidewalk drift past foggy windows. But when the neon clock above the ATM flicked to 12:01, the store's old door chime jingled a note too sweet and too wrong. Even though Jayden's eyes swore the door never swung open, he stepped out from behind the counter, scanning the aisles row by row, whispering a weak hello that dissolved in the air, answered only by the soft fizz of the soda fridge compressor cycling on and off like a distant heartbeat. Shrugging it off as bad wiring, the store had 100 quirks, Ravi said. He returned to his stool, popped open an energy drink, and tapped out a message to his roommate. "Bro, I swear this place is haunted lol." But before he hit send, the door chimes sang again, sweeter this time, almost giggling at him, and the radio snapped to static so harsh it drilled into his molars. He leaped up, energy drink forgotten, heart pounding as he peered once more down the aisles, the snack section empty, the freezer doors closed, the bathroom sign flicking in the corner with a broken bulb. Yet near the end of the candy aisle, half hidden behind towers of neon chip bags, a shape squatted, facing the shelf, rocking gently as if humming to itself. Jayden forced out a bark of false confidence. "Hey, store's closed, man, you got it." But the thing didn't flinch, didn't even breathe, so far as he could see, just rocked and rocked, until a bag of stale pretzels slipped from the shelf, bounced off its shoulder, and burst open in the silence. He approached slowly, each squeak of his sneaker soles a gunshot in the thick air, but when he rounded the corner, the shape was gone. The pretzels scattered in a circle as if something had squatted there for years, compressing the tiles beneath to a faint dent that wept black oil if he pressed a finger to it. He mopped it up with a wad of receipt paper, forced a laugh, and told himself he was imagining things. Graveyard shifts always did this to newbies, right? But the store didn't laugh with him. It just hummed in the freezer aisles like something clearing its throat. The next few hours bled slow. The clock on the wall ticked too fast or too slow, skipping seconds or repeating them until he felt his pulse match its hiccups. And every so often, a bottle or a can would tumble from a shelf with no wind, no footsteps, just a polite thud that rattled down his spine. When 3 a.m. clicked in cold green numbers on the register screen, the static on the radio cut clean, leaving a silence so deep his own breath seemed rude. Then, from the storeroom door behind the counter, the one Ravi said never to open unless 3 knocks, came a single dry rap, sharp as a bone breaking in a coffin. Jayden's throat clicked dry, his mind grasping for excuses, pipes settling, trucks outside, anything but what he knew in the marrow of his shaking legs. Yet before he could decide to ignore it, another knock, heavier, and then the third, softer than a sigh, and with it a wet voice whispering in the dark, "Let me out, Jayden, ... Please, it's so cold in here, ... And how did it know his name? He hadn't told a soul he worked this shift, except Ravi and his broke roommate who was probably high by now. He stumbled backward, knocking over a rack of sunglasses that clattered like teeth across the linoleum. The knock came again, once a polite reminder, and then the freezer door behind him creaked open on its own, spilling mist so thick it crawled around his ankles like hungry cats. Inside the freezer, faint shapes pressed against the plastic meat curtain, shapes that were too tall and too thin, hands that left wet prints on the glass but never fogged it with breath. Jayden clutched the store keys like a rosary, wishing he'd never mocked Ravi's rules, wishing he'd taken the graveyard shift at the gas station instead, wishing he'd never opened that damn door when the next knock came. But a part of him, a small traitorous voice deep in his ribs, whispered back, "Just look, just peek inside. It won't hurt you if you don't turn your back." And because dread is a kind of gravity, Jayden obeyed, stepping toward the storeroom as the door eased open without his touch, revealing a darkness that swallowed the sick flicker of the convenience store's old fluorescent lights, a darkness that smelled like old milk and something far older still. His phone in his pocket vibrated once, twice, then fell silent forever as the door swung wider, wider, and a pale arm, jointed all wrong like a spider's leg, curled around the frame, beckoning him closer with a single broken finger twitching, in time to the freezer's hum. Jayden's breath caught in his throat like a cork jammed in a bottle of old fear as the storeroom door gaped wider than the wall itself should allow, opening into a black that pulsed as if it were the lung of something vast hidden behind the drywall and flickering security monitors. And the spindly arm, pale as a drowned corpse and segmented by knobbled joints that bent backward when it dragged its clawed tips across the filthy linoleum, curled around his ankle before he could think to run, its touch colder than the ice chest in aisle 3 where soda cans rattled now without reason. He dropped the store keys, a clatter that rang through the aisles but did not echo back, as if the building swallowed every sound except his quickening pulse that drummed in, his ears like an alarm he could not silence. The arm tugged gently, almost kindly, coaxing him closer to the door that now breathed a warm, rank air that smelled like rotted fruit and bleach left too long in the mop bucket. And from deep within that impossible darkness, a voice bubbled up, wet and broken like a phone call underwater. "Don't lock me in again, Jayden, please, don't lock me in." And he saw through the door just enough light from the flickering exit sign to glimpse rows of shelves inside stacked not with cleaning supplies or toilet paper, but with rows and rows of things shaped like human torsos, wrapped in plastic that twitched as if they dreamed. A single naked bulb swung above them, swaying in a wind that did not touch him, and each time it rocked back, the shadows shifted, revealing pairs of eyes, milky and lidless, staring at him from within the bags like pickled things in jars at a backwoods roadside freak show. Bile rose in his throat as he croaked out a whimper for help, but no words formed because his tongue felt too thick, too slow, his mind crawling backward to the moment Ravi handed him the keys and begged him, not ordered him, never to open that door. His knees buckled as the arm's grip tightened, dragging him inch by inch across the grimy tile until his nails cracked against the checkout counter's metal edge, the register receipt spool unspooling beside his face, trailing tiny printed ghosts of transactions that read back things he'd never sold. One sold 99 cents. Thank you for shopping, until the tape snapped and fluttered across the floor like a pale snake. The security cameras overhead sputtered to life then, screens blooming static snow before resolving into grainy black and white images of every aisle, every freezer, every dusty snack rack, but instead of empty rows of overpriced candy and stale pastries, each aisle on the screen seethed with dozens of figures, shapes like people with sacks over their heads. Heads that tilted sharply in unison toward the lens every time Jayden's sob escaped his throat. One by one, each figure raised a hand and pressed a single crooked finger to the sack where a mouth should be. And he knew without seeing that the thing behind him, the thing dragging him backward through the rotting breath of the storeroom's impossible mouth, wanted him to see what Ravi had always locked away in there, the leftover pieces of every overnight clerk too broke, too desperate, too dumb to heed the knocks. In his mind, his mother's voice rose from the static, screaming his childhood name, Jaybird, run. But his legs had forgotten how to run. His body numb from the cold coiling up his spine like a nest of centipedes burrowing into his bones. The freezer doors behind the soda aisle swung open in unison with a thunderclap of suction, spilling mist that curled around his chest, icing over the floor until his breath plumed and cracked the air like glass, and through that mist slithered more arms, more fingers, each dipping into his hair, brushing his eyelids closed like a mother tucking in a child for a nightmare that would never end. The store lights buzzed overhead, the old fluorescent tubes popping one by one, each burst plunging a new section of QuickMart into a crawling darkness that pulsed with the wet breathing behind the walls. He tried to scream Ravi's name, to beg for rescue, but his lips only split at the corners, bleeding into his collar as the storeroom door's edge bit into his back and the thing inside unfolded a mass of stitched together limbs and eyes and mouths, some screaming, some whispering welcome home over and over. A choir of lost clerks and half-remembered customers who never left, bound together in that rotting black until the hunger dragged Jayden over the threshold. For a heartbeat, the world snapped to a pinprick of clarity. The smell of stale coffee, the flicker of the neon sign out front blinking closed so fast it buzzed like a fly in his skull. And then the door slammed shut behind his heels, cutting off the store with a hush so final it felt like a tomb sealing tight. Outside, the automatic door chime jangled once more, this time for no one, and the register spat out one last receipt that fluttered to the sticky floor. Behind the counter, employee ID J. Miller, shift complete, do not rehire. Asterisk. When the dawn cracked over the grimy windows of QuickMart, it found the storefront locked from the inside. The neon sign stuck halfway between open and closed, flickering like a dying heartbeat, and though commuters rushed by with dead indifference, a few swore they saw a thin smear of blood along the glass near the handle, as if a desperate hand had smeared a final plea before being pulled back into the dark. Ravi returned at precisely 7 o'clock, as he always did, his eyes more sunken than before, the smell of incense and stale sweat clinging to his worn suit as he fumbled with a jangling ring of spare keys that never left the pocket closest to his chest. And when the door swung open to welcome him, the smell that hit him nearly buckled his knees, a mix of freezer burn, rancid milk, and something older than mold, something that crawled up his nose and nested behind his eyes, where the nightmares were born. He did not call out for Jayden, not aloud, anyway, for Ravi knew from too many funerals and too many forced interviews with the police that no one who answered the storeroom's final knock ever spoke again, at least not in any tongue the living could bear to hear. Instead, he shuffled behind the counter, righted the toppled sunglasses rack, and scooped up the receipt that lay curled near the register, its cheap thermal paper still warm as if the machine had printed it only seconds ago. The words on it were the same ones he had seen too many times. Shift complete, do not rehire beneath it, in a spidery scroll that no machine he owned should ever produce. A single added line, thank you for staying with us, Jaybird. He crushed the slip in his fist, swallowing the bile that rose behind his tongue, and forced his gaze to the flickering monitors mounted above the scratch ticket display. Each screen showed a perfect still shot of each aisle, but in aisle 3, the soda freezer door yawned open to reveal a thin trail of dark footprints leading straight back to the storeroom door, which now shivered in its frame like an animal trying to breathe. Ravi turned the key in the lock 3 times, a ritual older than the lease he signed when he bought QuickMart off an old man who died a week later, a ritual older than the broken neon and the eternal hum of that single radio on the back shelf that no one remembered tuning 3 turns clockwise, 3 counter, then a single rap with the knuckles, so the thing inside knew he still kept his side of the bargain. He whispered a prayer into the register drawer, ignoring the new clerk applications wedged behind rolls of receipts, desperate kids, old drunks, mothers juggling to other jobs. Every soul easy to bait with a promise of $20 an hour in a quiet shift no one else wanted. Tonight, the store would open again. The sign would flicker to life. Another poor fool would prop their phone on the counter, scrolling memes and sipping cheap energy drinks until the clock crawled past midnight, and when the freezer door sighed, open like lungs gasping their first breath, they too would ignore Robbie's warnings. They too would press their ear to the storeroom door at the gentle, polite 3-knock request, and they too would be fed to whatever nightmare nested there, since before the gas pumps out front rusted into tombstones. Ravi flicked the open sign once, twice, coaxing its flicker into steadiness. then flipped the breaker on the soda cooler so it hummed loud enough to drown the faint scratching from the storeroom. A scratching that sometimes sang the names of every graveyard shift lost to QuickMart's hunger, the way Jayden's voice now mingled with those before him, whispering, "Clean aisle 4, restock the milk, it's so cold. Ravi, please unlock the door." But Ravi did not listen, did not dare listen. For the lease on his life demanded silence in exchange for the store's unending appetite. Outside, a fresh wave of morning zombies shuffled past commuters. Students, bored teenagers with nowhere else to kill time, and one by one they paused at the door, peering inside at the two bright aisles and the old man behind the counter, whose eyes flickered red in the camera's glare for just an instant. They pulled the handle, the chime jangled its too sweet note, and the door swung wide to swallow another shift hole. Because QuickMart never truly closed, and once you clocked in past midnight, you belonged to the store forever, your name stitched in static behind the flickering freezer light, humming softly between the aisles where no one ever really shops and the shadows never really sleep. Nurse Amelia Grayson had survived every nightmare St. Dunstan's Hospital could throw at her, screaming psych patients tearing 4 lines from their arms, overdose victims thrashing like dying animals, drunk brawlers whose broken teeth littered the trauma bay floor like confetti, yet nothing in her 6 years of graveyard shifts prepared her for the soft, a weeping voice that drifted through the vents just after the clocks struck midnight on her 30th birthday. A thin, hiccuping sob that rose from the abandoned East Wing which the hospital officially swore did not exist. Its blueprints neatly erased, its doors bolted shut after a fire 3 decades ago claimed an entire children's ward in smoke and whispers. On that particular night, exhausted from a double shift, her mind buzzing with caffeine and the soft pulse of the morphine pump behind room 204's curtain, Amelia caught her reflection in the medicine cabinet, hollow eyes, dark hair matted to her forehead and behind her reflection, the faint outline of a small hand pressed to the glass as though from the other side of the mirror. Her scream caught behind her teeth, half choked as she spun to find only an empty hallway humming with the squeak of unattended gurney wheels. Yet the sobbing behind the walls grew clearer, words forming beneath the hiccups. Nurse ... help. Me, I can't breathe. The exact words she'd heard once before during her internship. Spoken by a boy named Lucas who'd slipped into anaphylactic shock after a misfiled allergy chart, a mistake that haunted her every sleepless night since, heart pounding so hard she thought her veins would burst. Amelia found herself drawn toward the rotted double doors hidden behind a battered biohazard bin that housekeeping never moved anymore, doors that bore a rusted chain snapped long ago, but never replaced because no one, officially, ever needed to go in. Her keys rattled in her trembling hand as she pushed through the warped frame, stepping into darkness so dense it seemed to crawl up her nostrils, thick with the scent of scorched fabric and mildew. Her flashlight danced over cracked tile floors, the walls smudged with streaks of soot that vaguely resembled children's drawings if one squinted long enough, stick figures with jagged teeth, wide black eyes, all holding hands in a circle around a single figure on its knees. Her shoes squelched in puddles she dared not examine too closely as she moved deeper down the corridor, past rooms whose doors hung open like gasping mouths, each lined with rusted beds, still strapped with leather restraints that creaked when no breeze should have moved them. Somewhere ahead, that weeping voice pitched higher, gasping Amelia's name in a rasp that tore at her sanity. "New as Grayson, you promised you'd come back." And every syllable dripped with guilt dredged from her deepest regret, because she had promised Lucas's mother she'd keep an eye on him. And she had failed, and she had never forgiven herself. A dim glow pulsed from the far end of the hallway where the fire exit sign flickered an angry red, revealing a door she had never seen on any map. Room 7, its placard half-melted metal warped like soft flesh. Every instinct screamed to run, but her hand twisted the knob anyway, drawn by the desperate sobs that cracked and fractured until they sounded like a choir of children choking in unison. Inside, the air turned syrup-thick, reeking of burned plastic and disinfectant, and her flashlight trembled over rows of hospital beds bolted to the floor, each bed occupied by a shape beneath grimy sheets that rose and fell with breaths that should not be possible for the long dead. She stepped closer to the nearest bed, fingertips trembling as they lifted the sheet, revealing not Lucas but a waxy, eyeless mask stitched over a sunken skull, lips sewn shut around a breathing tube, pumping nothing but black fluid that dripped to the floor and wriggled away like worms seeking soil. The shape on the next bed twitched violently when her light passed over it, the restraints groaning under the force of a thing that should never move again, a patient bracelet still clinging to its bloated wrist, L. Patterson Lucas's full name, mocking her with impossible proof that she had buried him once, and yet here he was, rotting and awake, his sewn eyelids fluttering at her presence. Her mind fractured on the spot, a hairline crack spidering across her sanity as every bed in the ward shuddered to life, sheets slipping to the floor to reveal row after row of children with blistered skin and mouths gaping around silent screams, their collective moan vibrating through her bones until her knees buckled. From the shadows behind the final bed, a shape uncoiled, impossibly tall and thin. Clad in a nurse's uniform from half a century ago, the old starched white-stained, yellow with age and where its face should have been. A nest of black tubes pulsed like veins exposed to open air. It floated a few inches above the ground, trailing tendrils that caressed each child's face lovingly. And when its hollow sockets locked onto Amelia's tear-soaked eyes, it whispered in a voice layered with dozens of nurses before her, each syllable an echo from the grave. "You left them to burn, Amelia. Now you must stay and care for them forever. .. And though she clawed for the door, her feet skidded on the slick floor until she felt 1,000 tiny hands clamp around her ankles, dragging her backwards into the shadows, her screams muffled by the icy kiss of the nurse's fingers pressed gently over her mouth. When they found the East Wing decades later during a renovation meant to modernize the hospital's ancient foundations, the demolition crew uncovered a corridor bricked up from floor to ceiling, the inside walls scorched, black and riddled with fingernail scratches etched so deeply that gloved hands bled trying to scrub them clean. Hidden behind the rubble lay room 7. Its beds empty except for a single iron gurney in the center where a nurse's uniform, crisp white, still bearing Amelia Grayson's ID tag, rested neatly folded, soaked through with ancient blood that never dried, and beneath it a note scrawled in childlike script on a brittle patient chart. "She's watching us now. Don't open the door."